Have you met an experiencer that has gotten an implant?
I didn't believe these stories at all about these implants and them being used tracking until I wrote the patent that tells you how they do it.
So it's almost like we're walking hard drives or something.
I knew the address because it was the address of Chris Bledsoe. I knew the napkin because it was the presidential seal on a napkin from Camp David. And the picture was mailed to him by Tim Taylor.
By Tim Taylor.
And the only person that story can have been told to in that envelope was Barack Obama.
Oh my God. We are here with the great Bob McGuire. Very honored to have you. Your name keeps coming up. I think, we are kind of in a lot of the same circles. You're very involved in kind of UFO Twitter. But, UFO Twitter can be a very murky place.
Yes.
And I think you have a lot, you kind of rise above the rest as far as really impressive credentials and thorough investigation into UFO propulsion and theories about, where they exist, how they exist. And I think you have the background to kind of back all of this up. You really have an amazing history. For a couple of decades, you worked at various three-letter agencies inside the government, and then you started Hawkeye 360, Federated Wireless. And so couldn't be more honored to have you, especially amidst this amazing new backdrop. We have a new set for American Alchemy. And our co-host, recurring co-host, Jack, who's here, who is also very excited to talk to you, and again, can always speak at higher levels than me when it comes to kind of heterodox physics framework. So honored to have you both.
We're glad to have the great Science Bob.
Oh my goodness! Please tell that to my girlfriend, so she'll think it's fit. I'm not lying to her.
Well, let's get this to millions of views.
Let's do it.
You can brag to her.
It's good. Yeah. So Jesse, it's a great. I followed you and listened to you, and I love your podcast, and it's an honor to be on it.
Oh man, well, it's an honor to have you. Really appreciate it. And there's so many kind of jumping off points and like places to start, but why don't we just get into what we were talking about offset a second ago? You were saying you think you have a connection. I just had Matthew Pines on, who's an incredible thinker.
Matthew Pines is that person who has a near perfect photographic memory, who decided not to do physics, and I'm ready to turn him over my knee and spank him for not doing physics. Right. Because the guy is the real deal. He commanded the entire field, talked to you about detailed stuff that excited me, excited my imagination, and he did it without looking at a single note for hours.
Yeah, it was extremely impressive.
It's very impressive.
It was one of the few times, especially when he was getting into branchial and radial space, where I felt like I could barely track or barely keep up with what he was saying.
Hypersurface foliations of branchial space that are computationally bounded relative to the underlying structure. And so they have to do this massive equivalencing. And then they perceive they have a linear thread of history. So they believe that they're continuous.
And I was like trying to, ask decent questions, but it was definitely tough hearing that for the first time.
Okay, so there's an issue. Everybody understands the issue in physics now is we have quantum field theory, which is terrific at doing what it can do.
Yep.
And we have general relativity, which is terrific at what it can do. Every test of general relativity that science has been able to cook up, it continues to perform perfectly. Every test, it passes. Because one failure, and we have to redo the physics. Quantum field theory is the same. We're blessed with all sorts of electronics and gadgets and other things in our life now that would not have been possible without the quantum revolution in the 20th century. And the man kind of at the heart of all of it is Albert Einstein. So Einstein did a differential equation that equates the material in the universe to how it curves the universe around it. David Hilbert did it a different way. The big development in the 19th century was one of the big developments was Lagrangian mechanics. So you take a thing called the action, and physics bodies always follow the principle of least action. They take the path of least action to do something. And Hilbert formulated the problem of gravity as a principle of least action and got to the answer by a different path than Einstein.
Do you think that the principles of least action, or Fermat's principle, where, light seems to, almost follow an optimal path between 2 points, that points to some sort of information theoretic underpinning to physics, where the whole thing is sort of optimized in this kind of computational way?
So I think we now understand that all this matter and energy around us is governed by quantum mechanics. And in the description of it is in quantum field theory. So quantum information theory is now kind of all over the place and burgeoning and growing hugely. And eventually we're going to find what John Archibald Wheeler said to me and many others.
You met him?
I'll tell you that story in a minute.
I want to hear that. That's amazing.
Listen, you're not going to believe how lucky I was. Okay, so he said it from bit. And what he meant was that which constitutes the universe all around us are actually bits of information that describes their configuration and the state they're in.
Yeah.
So that's what it from bit went.
Yeah, but I never understand that on a lower level. Like, he'll be like, the collapse of the wave function breaks down into like a bunch of yes/no questions, and so you get it from bit or whatever.
Yeah.
What does that exactly mean? Like, because I think about, it does feel like, whatever eigenstate gets chosen is like, an on-off switch or something.
Yep.
But like, how is it a series of yes/no questions that gets to wave function collapse?
Okay, so people don't really yet have a really great theory for the wave function. There's some guesses. There's some theories that, to me, have not yet been proven.
I have a theory.
Okay, well, that's good. It's always good to have a theory, because that describes a theory should allow you to describe an experiment that will falsify what you're describing. So, but some kind of interaction with or observation of a quantum state collapses the wave function. And all that means is you take all this possible states and you collapse all these possible states, which is a huge amount of information, to one. Pick one state out of all the possibilities, and doing this observation collapses it to that one state. You can't predict ahead of time what that state will be. You can predict it probabilistically so far as we know, and that's the only way.
And this is an evolution perspective, is that right?
What's that?
The evolution hypothesis for the reduction of the wave function.
There's some hypotheses. I'm not convinced.
What is that?
I'm not convinced.
The observer effect collapsing the wave function, which is heavily referenced by a lot of these simulation theory universes. So in line with Riz's.
I'm not convinced that any of them are exactly right. So Everett was Wheeler's student.
Yes.
And Everett did the multiverse.
Yeah.
And that seems to be growing in popularity, which gets rid of the wave collapse problem.
Yeah, well, in Everett's case, he would say wave function collapse never actually occurs, and you just get universe branching.
The universe is
right.
branching
Yeah.
off.
Yeah.
And so and apparently it's perfectly good mathematically. To me, I don't know how we'll ever test the hypothesis that the universe is a multiverse. But apparently others think we can. And I'm hoping an experiment will be constructed that will allow us to say the only possible way we could have gotten this experimental result is if there was another universe that branched off ours and is still impacting it through some mechanism. It's the mechanism that we will have to find and test.
And Sabina Hassenfelder has recently argued that you can't test it, that it's an untestable hypothesis and sort of therefore a non-scientific hypothesis.
Sabina is a hypercritical, fantastic scientist who has had to give up on her academic career because she's angered too many people, which is I hate, because she's very, very capable.
Yeah.
Extremely capable theoretical physicist, but she doesn't suffer fools gladly.
How'd you meet John Wheeler?
That's interesting. So I lived in New Jersey for a period of time, worked for an entity that worked for the intelligence community, and my wife was a nurse at in a retirement community. And so she came home one day. She says, we have a new resident in the retirement community. And she says, it's the same name on a bunch of your books. And I went, John Wheeler? And she pointed to us, I said, John Wheeler? And she said, yes. I said, well, take my books out there and see if you can get him to autograph them and ask him if I can come and visit him. So he autographed my books and invited me to come over. So I went over and had tea with him and met his wife. And he had a house there's a retirement village where you were guaranteed to be there all the way through your final hospitalization. It was that kind of retirement village. And he had a place, and I went over and visited him and became a regular visitor. And we
No way.
Yeah, regular.
What were those interactions like? Did you
Oh,
learn
they were
anything from them?
fantastic. Yeah, look, I would ask questions. He would ask me questions. He explained to me the parts of his big, thick gravitation book that I couldn't understand, even though I had a lot of differential geometry.
Yeah.
And
wow.
that was interesting. But I occasionally just was his chauffeur.
Yeah.
I would take him up to the Institute for Advanced Studies, Core Princeton University, so he could hear a talk and hear those talks. And it was just amazing.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, it was
That's
just
incredible.
amazing. It was just amazing sitting in the back of the room watching these people kowtow to Wheeler. But the other thing was, where I worked, a member of the advisory board for that place that I worked, Freeman Dyson was on it. So I got to interact with him, and I went to church with him on
Can
occasion.
you say where you work?
Yeah, it was the Institute for Defense Analysis.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Freeman Dyson was involved in that.
Yeah, he was one of the scientific advisory board members.
Can you say what you did?
Yeah, I worked on communications problems for the United States government because it was the Institute for Defense Analysis, Center for Communications Research.
Wow. Well, so as you know, I used to work with a guy named Eric Weinstein.
Yes.
He's become convinced that there's like a lineage of secret science in the United States, and Wheeler would be at the center of it. It would be like John Wheeler, Freeman Dyson, Bryce DeWitt, Hugh Everett. These names would be involved in such a program. Do you believe that there are elements of science that are not open source and that have been classified by the U.S. government?
We not only do I believe it, I know the mechanism, because the Atomic Energy Act has the ability, so long as you brush up next to it at all, of classifying new physics from birth, if it's viewed as touching those fields.
So one example of that would be, and we're going to get into UFOs and how you got into that, but the special definition of nuclear material in the Atomic Energy Act.
You read the definition of special nuclear material in the Public Atomic Energy Act of 1954, it basically states any material that releases any kind of atomic energy.
That would be retrieved crash material.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a
Energy Act.
sneaky way.
No, it is. If you actually read the Atomic Energy Act, if something is not a nuke, but it has radiological energy coming off it, alpha, beta decay, whatever.
Same secrecy.
Same secrecy.
So it is, in my opinion, given Oppenheimer's status up until he lost his clearance, it is impossible, given what we know now, that he did not know what was going on because of the initial makeup of the people dealing with the UFO problem at the top national security level, especially after the 1952 flyover of Washington, where Truman lost his lunch over it. I mean, he really went nuts. And
Is that true? Because I've heard there's an aviation journalist named Curtis Peebles who said that Truman was on the phone with Edward J. Ruppelt, who ran Blue Book at the time, because Truman was so freaked out about the Washington flyover. Is that right in your opinion?
in my opinion, it is completely true. People have told me that. I have not seen evidence of
Did the
that.
Joint Chiefs of Staff talk to you or concern you about the unknown and the unidentified flying object?
Oh, yes, we discussed it at every conference that we had with the military, and they never were able to make me a concrete report on.
Do you have
what
anything
they'd
on the
see.
subject, sir?
No, I haven't anything on the subject. And, there's always things like that going on. Flying saucers, and they've had other things.
But anyway,
I always thought it was probably pretty good because Peebles was a UFO skeptic, but he still thought that Truman freaked out about the UFO flyover.
He did, and I believe that Oppenheimer and other people in the Manhattan Project were the original secret keepers and the natural people to call to look into one if one crashed.
Well, if you believe David Grush, then they literally set up the secrecy. I mean, I do too. He's on record with me saying, you know, we were like, if you could meet anybody in history, who would you meet? And he goes,
I would probably ask Sarbacher, Oppenheimer, and be like, what was your thought process in the 40s and 50s, you know, squirreling this away? I mean, besides overlaying the Manhattan Project secrecy.
Because Oppenheimer was the one who created the classification that included the UFO stuff?
Oh, all those guys.
And it was one of the most interesting parts of your interview with him, because I totally agree with. And I'm on record on Twitter, Facebook, and other places saying people keep pointing a finger at the CIA and they're not looking at where the secrets have to be kept. I kept pointing to DOE. I kept asking about why people weren't looking at DOE. I kept asking why people weren't looking at the Battelle Institute. And a friend of mine who is a deep researcher in all this, she was also jumping up and down about Battelle, and that's Linda Thompson, who's a premier researcher in the UAP area.
Yeah. Well, it was, speaking of the DOE, you know, they funded the Human Genome Project.
Yes.
So do you think that connects at all? If they somehow have a greater ontological truth around, you know, that we're not alone, that aliens exist?
I was asked by IARPA to take a look at.
You want to just tell the audience what IARPA is?
IARPA is the Intelligence Community Advanced Research Project Agency. So it was formed, it was put together after DNI came into being to be the equivalent of DARPA for the intelligence community. And the current deputy director of DNI, Stacy Dixon, was the director when I was asked, could I take a look at using CRISPR-Cas9 and coding information into DNA.
Wow.
Yeah, so I decided not to put together a proposal. I was too busy with other things and doing some work I can't even discuss for them.
But they asked you about putting...
Well, yeah, some people in my team at Hume Center at Virginia Tech did put in a proposal, and I think worked on it.
What year was this?
It would have been 2013 or 14.
Wow.
These kind of novel data storage techniques are all over different media, right? DNA, for instance, crystals, type of things. We were talking about this on the way over here, that the notion of encoding DNA with information, I mean, how many layers can you go down into that, you know? Particularly with CRISPR-Cas9.
There is tons of space, terabytes of data you can put on DNA that we don't know what it's used for. So it's in the quote, you can use the quote junk DNA to store all kinds of.
Well, that's just fascinating. Yeah, you can store semantic information on DNA.
Yes.
It just takes a while to retrieve because it needs to be stored very cold.
You got to read it off. You'd have to figure out the RNA to read it off.
But when I was talking to Lou Elizondo, I said, if you were an alien race and maybe you, in the instance of getting wiped out, wanted to save some monument or some really important time capsule for a future civilization that might encounter you, what would you do? And I was suggesting all sorts of things. I was like, would you put an object in the Lagrangian point that is sort of just hovering right next to the Earth? There are all sorts of things you could come up with, build a pyramid, whatever. And he said something really interesting.
If you were going to make something truly enduring, there's really only two ways to do it. Mm-hmm. You either put something out in deep space where the chances are of it coming into contact with something are minimal, or biology, genetics. Yep. Because genetics is a fingerprint, and that will continue as long as a species survives and finds other places to live. So will that message. Yeah. And you can put a lot, and the beauty about DNA is that it self-replicates. Yeah. So that message, in essence, if you code it right, could be there as long as the species survives.
And that freaked me out. I was like, whoa.
If I were a betting man, I would bet that the intelligence community has figured out how to use CRISPR-Cas9 to transport intelligence that's been gathered in the person of a intelligence officer already. Whether they do it or not, I don't have any idea, but I am convinced that it is possible.
Whoa, wait, so you're saying the person is a storage mechanism
And can walk right through any security system undetected, is carrying all that information in their person.
Do you think it would be local or systemic? Like, could it be a fingernail? Could it be a hair?
I don't know. I am insufficiently familiar with the technology to know how much you could localize it. But you can store the information to tremendous amounts in the DNA of a human.
Whoa. So it's just fascinating. So it's almost like we're walking hard drives or something. What would be the practical use of that? Like, do you have any examples?
Suppose I wanted to get out all the schematics for and construction documents for every classified project that's being done by Russia or China. I could encode all of it probably on 1 or 2 humans and walk it out.
Whoa. That is
That's what I think is possible.
That is-
I don't know that it's being done, but I think it's possible
Do you think
technically.
you could remotely sense that?
No.
With, like, coherent.
No. You'd have to, in other words, it's like the human is a one-time pad.
Yeah.
You have to know the human's carrying it before you even know to read it.
Yeah.
It's like the equivalent of something.
So
like,
wild.
Something, the moral equivalent of a one-time pad.
How'd you get into UFOs?
Okay, so I had some interesting experiences growing up. They're kind of inexplicable. And then I woke up one day when I was very young, before I went to school, walked into where my mother and her friend were visiting with each other, and they were drinking coffee, and I went over to a bookcase, pulled a book out, opened it up, and started reading it to them. And I had never spent a day in school because I was 3 years old. And so it was just wild. And I didn't really remember it until my mother and her best friend later reminded me of it. I didn't remember it, but my mother, because I just knew I always could read. And my mother and her friend told me the story repeatedly. So it came kind of apocrypha, if you will.
So you think maybe it was primordial knowledge or something?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I'm not going to guess. The gods or the aliens or whatever gave me a knowledge. And so that kind of went on until I was 10 years old. And I bloomed when I was 10 years old. I built my own telescope from parts. I became an amateur radio operator and built my own equipment. I memorized Gray's Anatomy from cover to cover, knew the functions.
So you were tested.
I was tested by a doctor who didn't believe me, and he came to a Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' home and told me to stand on the hearth of the fireplace and be grilled by this doctor, and he couldn't stump me. So he knew I knew Gray's Anatomy cover to cover.
Do you have like a perfect eidetic memory?
I did. So it's gotten worse with age. But it's still good.
Yeah.
It's still very, very good. But it's not perfect. And everyone thought I was going to be a doctor. That was just the going in assumption. So I went off to college with my girlfriend from high school. We went to the same place. That was how I chose where to go, is where she was going. And so I picked her up the first month at school. I picked her up on a Friday to drive us home for the weekend. And it was 2.5 hour drive. And about 2.5 hours into it, suddenly we found ourselves in the middle of nowhere. Didn't know where we were, didn't know how we got there. And eventually, looking at our watch, we figured out that somehow we had been asleep for an hour and a half. So this was a classic example of missing time. I had no idea what to call it. I had no idea what happened. I just knew her mother was going to be upset. So I quickly got her home and apologized to her mother, saying we were talking so much, I took a wrong turn, but we're here now, and I apologize.
Have you gotten a hypnotic regression to see?
I have, but not the kind you're talking about. I want one.
Interesting.
So, but a month later, I left that college, stopped wanting to be a doctor. I became a mathematician and an engineer and went to a technical school. And that changed my whole life, whatever that experience was.
Wow.
It's just, I can't explain it. I don't have a reason for it. I'm just telling you the outcome because I don't know what actually happened during that time.
To the extent you can talk about it, what was your government experience?
I did work for NSA and the CIA and NRO, et cetera, for depending on what was needed for nearly 30 years.
Mainly math and engineering?
Math and engineering, and occasionally lots of computer science and embedded programming to do things they needed doing. But it was always, I had developed something that they needed, and a need would arise, and they would ask me to implement it and put it in the field.
Did you ever run into UFO stuff there?
No, I'm sorry. Later, when I decided to leave doing that work every day and become a founding member of the Hume Center for National Security and Technology at Virginia Tech, rumors began to run around. And I was still well connected all through the community. And people told me about this UFO stuff being floated around. And I saw some of it, pictures, some that have not come out in the open. And
really?
Yeah, some that have not been shown. And some of them are like wild.
Really?
But yeah, and I don't want to get anybody in trouble, so I just don't tell any details other than the one is a massive triangle above the water. I mean, this thing is huge.
Wow. Could we get in touch with the person with the photo and try to?
I don't know that we can.
Did you ever interface with the Office of Scientific Intelligence or with the Office of Global Access?
A director of the Office of Global Access was a member of the advisory board for the Hume Center, and later has done consulting with and advises Hawkeye 360, which is a company I founded.
Wow, that's amazing.
She's quite bright. I mean, Hawkeye, just let me give you one example.
Yeah.
Hawkeye has on its advisory board Tish Long, which was the first female head of a three-letter agency. She was a director of the NGA.
Wow.
As Hawkeye's big contracts are with NRO and NGA.
Can you explain what Hawkeye 360 does?
Yeah. So Hawkeye is a geospatial sensor. What do I mean by that? One of the inputs to geospatial intelligence is somebody is transmitting a signal on the ground. Where is it? After you figure out where it is, can you tell us about it? So Hawkeye developed satellite sensors and got them lost first on SpaceX and now on Rocket Labs regularly from WHOP. And they orbit the Earth, and using the received signal and motion and time difference of arrival on multiple sensors, does some math using highly accurate clocks and the position of the satellites over the Earth and other things to derive the location on the Earth as they pass over. So the intelligence is, here's a signal, it's located right there, and now we can look at the externals and say we think it's this, and that's handed off to the intelligence grid. We don't know why they want it, because they give us a tasking and the equipment does it automatically now.
So it's multi-sensory analysis.
Oh, a multi-sensory analysis of where are things transmitting from on the ground. And that is a very valuable input to intelligence.
Can only imagine. You founded that company.
Yes. And my name are on the patents that make it work.
That's incredible.
This is a hosted payload on the vehicles that it goes on?
No.
It's just a software package.
No. We build the satellites.
The whole bus.
The whole bus.
Yeah.
Satellite and bus. And what's in it are things we developed at Hawkeye 360. Now, the way I did Hawkeye 360 is I didn't want to give up my day job and go work at 105 hours a week. So the deal we worked out with the VCs is we got a small percentage of stock, and we helped them develop the ideas and help them get the patents, help them defend the patent process, which we did successfully, help them hire talent that we knew from all of our experience and from our teaching and other things. So they got young talent and senior talent, brought it in, and they took the company after I ended my 1.5 years of consulting. So I became a stockholder after that. I never was involved in the day-to-day operations because I didn't want to be.
And have you guys ever detected UFOs?
I don't know whether we have or not, but as I told you earlier, I went to SCU in 2022 in Huntsville, the SCU meeting.
What does SCU stand for?
It's the Society for Studying UAP Phenomena Scientifically, Scientific Coalition for the Study of UAP. And it's the leadership is in Huntsville and other places, but the regular meetings have been, the in-person meetings have been held in Huntsville near Marshall Space Flight Center, et cetera. So I went there in 2022, and people associated with Space Force from three-letter agencies came up to me and talked to me about applying Hawkeye abilities to just looking for UAP signals on the ground. By then, I had given up my security clearance, so I couldn't help them directly. So I pointed them to the right people inside of Hawkeye 360 that could help them. I don't know what they did because I'm not privy to it.
How would you guess you might detect UAP?
Okay. So let's suppose that the government knows that UAPs are emitting a certain transmitted frequency, and they get some inkling that the thing is over there somewhere. Hawkeye will figure out by looking for that frequency exactly where they are.
Like hypothetically 1.6 gigahertz.
1.6 gigahertz at interesting places, I am certain has been looked at by Hawkeye 360.
That's fascinating. Very interesting.
But I don't know it for a fact because I'm not on the inside anymore.
Sure. Did you ever interface with any kind of centers that work on atomic stuff, or
I worked at Sandia National Labs in 1976 into 77. After I got done with my initial mathematics degree, it was fun. I learned a lot, but it became quickly clear, especially in the 70s, if you wanted respect and to be a leader, you had to have a PhD. So I left there and went and got my PhD in applied mathematics from Brown University.
What was your PhD thesis?
Nonlinear filtering and how to solve the nonlinear filtering problem by using approximations and perturbation theory to get nearby things to linear. So you can use linear, but then you can perturb it and get nonlinear looks at it. So it allows you to figure out something about the nonlinear behavior. It's the same thing as hidden Markov model. It's the same thing. It's the same thing, except it's dynamical systems where this might be a rocket emitting a signal or a UFO emitting a signal, and you're trying to track it, or you're trying to demodulate a signal. I'll give you an example. This is the first application I ever did. A person that was very highly placed at the Jet Propulsion Laboratories figured out what I had done for my PhD thesis. So he asked permission if I could be allowed to work on the computers that we had at the Institute, which were provided to us by the intelligence community, to work on that signal. And the signal was the Russians and the French sent a probe to Halley's Comet. The probe on its way did a gravitational assist flyby of Venus. While it was near Venus, it dropped 2 balloon probes into the atmosphere of Venus. Now, the Soviets, they did a great job with that, but they made an assumption which turned out to be false. They assumed how fast the temperature in the atmosphere would be conducted inside to where the thermometer was, because what it does is if it got too hot, it figured it was getting too low, so it would increase the helium in the balloon to lift it up. So the probes did this in the atmosphere until the batteries ran out. But the first entry, it went too deep, and the temperature got really high, and the winds were really rough, and so the signal was distorted by Doppler and other things. But even though tracking a signal is a nonlinear process, people have linear capabilities. My process does nonlinear things. So I coded it up on the supercomputer. We demodulated the signal, and they got transmissions back from Venus that showed us the data, so we knew we had gotten it right. And we literally took a piece of paper and wrote down the zeros and ones on type it on a piece of paper, flew it out to the Jet Propulsion Laboratories. They took the paper from us, walked it into another room, and gave it to the Soviet scientists.
Whoa.
And because it was interesting data from Venus. And how do I know it was interesting? Well, a few years later, I was called and told to come down to the chief scientist's office at NSA. And I went down there, and they're told it was about tech transfer. This is during the Clinton era, when technology transfer was mandated by executive order if it was no longer critical to the nation's security to keep it secret. So this technique I'm telling you about was a thing they wanted me to come and talk about. And I didn't understand why, but I went down. I walked into the room, and I knew why. Because in the room was maybe the most famous Venusian planet scientist that ever lived. And he said that once this story was told, billions and billions of people would think it was a great thing the NSA had done it. Carl Sagan was sitting in the room.
No way.
Yeah, Sagan was sitting.
Wait, this is crazy.
Sagan was sitting in
the office.
the NSA office.
So what did they figure out?
They figured out that the transmissions that they got gave them details on the clouds that were in the atmosphere that they never thought they were going to get, because they never intended it to go that deep. But so the data frames coming back were telling them the data collected by the scientific instruments on board, and Sagan learned how it happened and how it was done and who did what in that meeting.
Wow. So it's clear that Sagan was somehow like super deep. I always thought he was deep on the inside because he.
No, but I don't mind telling you, he's passed. I don't mind. He had a contractor green badge with a picture on it. You don't get that if you're casual. He did not have a casual relationship.
Do you think he was intel?
He had to have that badge. Right?
Well,
he was a consultant.
Well, he had a top secret clearance for sure in the, I believe, early 70s, late 60s, because he was, or it was maybe a little before that, but he was working with the Air Force, and it was a project called A119, and they were considering nuking the moon as a show of force against the Soviets, and he was like the main consultant on that. And it was interesting too. He grew up very interested in UFOs. He would write about it in his diaries. He would debate his mentor, an astronomer. He would constantly say, I think this needs, more credence, and people, we should look into this. And then, boom, he just flips into being this dogmatic anti-UFO person.
I believe, without knowing it's a fact, here's my belief. He bumped up against the program and was told he needed to change his tune.
He must have. Because then
he had a contractor badge for the National Security Agency.
Well, he also goes on to, write Contact and Pale Blue Dot. And if you watch Contact, that and you're into UFOs, it's very disclosure. It's disclosure through fiction in a way that's palatable for people. And then if you think about the book, The Demon Haunted World, which ironically is sort of, I think has a blurb by Richard Dawkins or something, and the demons are supposed to be fundamentalist or overly zealous thoughts that humans have, but in fact, just you take the demon haunted world as this sort of double entendre, and maybe that represents Sagan's worldview a lot more, and he just believes in the UFO thing.
Yeah, I don't have direct knowledge, but kind of nothing else makes sense.
So you're probably, I was talking with Jack earlier, and one of the reasons we were so excited to have you on is that you're probably one of the deepest people when it comes to really trying to discover kind of ontological truth in the UFO question. And so, do you have a working theory as to how these UFOs fly, where they're from, that sort of thing?
So I'm into the physics and I'm pursuing the physics.
Yep.
But I did not do physics all my life as my avocation. So I am relearning physics, consuming it rapidly, learning from people who tweak my interest, like Eric Weinstein and the people that working at Wolfram, etc., and Pais and Sarfati and all these people. But they have one thing in common. Every single one of them is trying to figure out some manipulation of the stress energy tensor in Einstein's field equations, that when you fiddle with this over here, that goes into the machinery that goes on this side of the equation, and you get manipulation of gravity out of it. All of them are doing that.
That's amazing.
All of them. It's all. That's what they're doing.
So the question is, how do you manipulate that stress energy tensor?
That's a good question.
Because, can I just set it up for the audience?
Yeah.
It's prosaically understood, even in conventional physics, that the stress energy tensor in Einstein's field equations, which govern, general relativity, should theoretically affect gravity, but you need, energy so high that we just can't produce in normal prosaic means or whatever through electromagnetism or any other way. And so do you think that there's an engineering mechanism to amplify energy to that extent?
Here is circumstantial evidence that it's been done. Your recent interview was with Pais.
Yep.
I didn't believe a word he said for a year.
Yep.
Just didn't believe it at all. So I haven't seen your interview, but I began to believe it when I figured out on my own that all of these people were working on the same stuff. I'm in the private email exchange that Jack Sarfati conducts while he's doing his work every day, and he keeps insisting that there's a low-power version of manipulating the stress energy tensor that will give you the necessary things on the output of the equation. His idea is manipulating the speed of light so that it's much slower, and so it's more easily attainable and other things. So here's what I think is going on. Pais says that if you can manipulate the quantum vacuum, you can trap it between two metal plates and get some energy out, or put a huge electromagnetic field in a tiny, tiny place so there's a huge gradient. And the universe is constantly creating out of magical mathematics and the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, virtual particles. So you care about, can I take that vacuum with its particles and do anything useful with it? Pais has said, I can subject the vacuum to tremendous electromagnetic fields, and in so doing, take virtual particles, pull them out, and make them real particles, and create exotic matter that will now be useful to bend space and time. So you can take his little piece of magic back here, which is using electromagnetism, and make a warp drive out of it. Now, what Pais does not do in his patents. So we're having to do inference under the assumption that the patents are real and true. That what's been done is figured out something about manipulation of the vacuum that we don't know a lot about yet, but Pais has patented it with the Navy's bulldozer. They ordered the patent office.
Do you have any ideas as to how you might engineer that sort of level of electromagnetism?
I'll tell you what, I'm going to guess, because I don't know. I don't know, but I'm going to guess. They gave him some crash material, and he figured out how to write down the equations for it.
Really?
And it's a strong case because there are 3 patents that are all really compelling on their own, but they don't work on.
Until you glue them together.
They need each other.
They need each other. This produces the input. This takes the input and does something with it.
Right.
You need all of that for it to work. The only thing that makes sense to me is the Navy wanted it worked on, They took it into a lab where Pais worked, and he figured out how to make it work. And why would the Navy care? I'll tell you why the Navy would care. I'll tell you exactly why. Because the Chinese care, and the Navy is the military entity that will take on the Chinese if they started acting ugly over Taiwan, etc. They want an advantage over the Chinese PLA, People's Liberation Army, and we know for a fact they are working on reverse engineering. They have down craft. We know it.
What's your smoking gun that the Chinese have a program? Because this is always something that, you know, you hear, and I've heard it from a lot of very credible people, but I don't hear a lot of first principles like, you know, this is where
there is a ton of evidence all over the place that they are inundated by UAPs that's shutting down airports, and people are putting it up on Telegram. You can see it, and I guarantee you the Chinese are shooting stuff down.
The Chinese famously, of course, appropriate IP from other developed countries, particularly in aerospace and defense. What's your sense of whether they got their first start by siphoning off of our program versus their own crash retrieval?
My opinion is that in order to prevent accidental intercontinental ballistic missile exchange, we revealed some things to both the former Soviet Union and China. And you can see that we did this in the Nixon-Brezhnev treaty.
Yep, 1971.
It's written. The red phone was invented to stop UFOs from starting thermonuclear war.
Yeah, it's wild. It's just hidden in plain sight.
Right in
literally
plain sight.
In the 1971 SALT talks, it's like we want to make sure that the Soviets don't mistake these unknowns in their airspace for acts of American aggression, and it would be a huge part of détente. And it's literally written in official documents.
But we don't have a treaty with China. But to think we would not want the same protections is foolish. And we know for a fact, because of the balloon causing a disruption, that we have a red phone to China, because the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Milley, said that they pick up the phone, they call their equivalents in the People's Liberation Army. And that's what the red phone was for from the beginning, to stop mistakes from being made.
Deconfliction line.
Deconfliction line.
Wow.
We have deconfliction lines. We've even seen deconfliction lines work in current events. So the Russians, through their proxies, proxy militias, attacked a bunch of Americans in Syria, and we called them on the deconfliction line. Of course, they denied their existence or having anything to do with them. So they fired some stuff at our Marines and other people that were with them, and we called in the Armada, and we wasted all of them in hellfire for about 15 minutes until there was nothing left. So we know that deconfliction still exists, and we've seen America act on things, but only after deconfliction is done.
Yeah.
And if their people are being attacked and they go through the process of deconfliction before they will defend their people, you know it has to exist for protection against inadvertent insanity.
It's still just this crazy black box, as with all Chinese politics, as to how much progress they've made, where they're at, you know.
Well, the first thing you know is the government of the United States will constantly work to gain access through any means, human, technical, whatever, on what it is the Chinese are doing. So let's suppose we get an inkling through a leak, or we get a break and we get some kind of intelligence that says they're doing this over here. And so this can only be this. And as you see, and they inadvertently display a saucer to our overhead satellite systems. I mean, just people make mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
The number one source of intelligence is human fallibility.
Yep.
Totally, the number one source. 99% of intelligence is open source or human fallibility.
It's a really crazy sort of topic. You have all these figures pop up also when it comes to kind of, you know, secret science that Jack and I have spoken about. So you have Townsend Brown, Tesla, Ning Li, Eugene Plekletnov. I can name a ton of these people, Miguel Alcubierre. Do you think once you take the governor, so to speak, off of physics, you end up with kind of like a plethora of like really exciting warp drive, faster than light, EM drive options?
I think there'll be a ton of work done,
Yeah.
but I think the government wants to protect both the people, their reputations, and the institutions that have done things and that they don't want known and would harm the institutions and the people if it were to become known. So the thing I would expect the government to do is, as quote disclosure gets going, and we learn that anti-gravity and propulsion are being worked on, that suddenly some people will be allowed to do it without being stomped on in corporate startups and whatever.
That has to be the case, because assuming that Russia and China have this stuff, if the average talented STEM student in America isn't aware of any of these frameworks, then we're at a massive disadvantage.
Yeah, so let's close off what we started before. I want to finish the thought.
Yeah.
The Navy would have pies do it if they wanted exotic propulsion, so they'd have a massive advantage over the Chinese because they're going to be fighting in the Chinese pond with their Navy.
Yep.
And the Chinese are going to throw everything they can at the Navy.
Yeah, or the pies
And
thing.
they want an advantage.
Or it's like a limited hangout where it's like, we're going to give you, it's like the cicada thing where it's like, we're going to give you a little bit of info. If you're smart enough, you can figure out the info and then you get initiated into the program.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably what's going on here because, I've become this amateur historian of Townsend Brown. He went to Hyman Rickover, who was head of the nuclear Navy, I think in the late 50s, early 60s. And he was like, look, I'm working on I'm getting all these crazy gravitational effects. And
Yeah.
Townsend Brown had been a Navy seaman actually, decades earlier. And Hyman Rickover goes, don't waste your time. We're already on it. Like, we know all about this. And so, it's pretty clear. And I'm, in touch with some Navy special warfare guys as well. And like, I think the Navy knows a lot about this stuff. I think they're very on top of it. So it's like, how would you let the cat out of the bag without, tipping your hat off to your adversary? But how would you let certain STEM students who are qualified in America know? And you might come out with these 3 disparate patents that you can piece together if you're qualified enough.
I think that the changing milieu for educational institutions and what people choose to go into has been changed dramatically by modern society. People don't go into those fields in sufficient numbers for us to get the talent we need to do this in a major way, given that it costs so much to go to a university that people want to have a high-income job when they get out so they can pay back their loans quickly. It's just the system is biasing people away from doing what's necessary to make a big... We built the modern world because our university system was the best there is, and we've hobbled it by making people go on debt.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Horrible.
It feels like we're living in late-stage decadent capitalism or something where the smartest people are working on the dumbest things.
The very best mathematicians are going into finance.
Yeah. They're being quants.
And I know all these young people out here they're awesome. They're really smart and they're rationally playing casino games with crypto. They're like on Solana investing in meme coins. And I don't blame them because that's the way you kind of, leapfrog everybody else.
Yeah.
It's the way you get the huge bump. And meanwhile, like, the world of atoms and engineering has completely stagnated over the last 50 years. And that's, as far as, our national competitiveness, that's way more important vector.
So let's suppose I wanted to cover up gravity. So I did see all this unbelievable stuff that Wheeler got started down in North Carolina with 2 industrialists supporting him. And all of these people came to Wheeler regenning gravitational research. And his first speaker was Richard Feynman doing an approximate quantization of gravitational as his talk. And it's a great model so long as it's not super high energy physics. or super gravitational physics.
Yeah.
It works. It simply works in the regime in which the approximation works. Feynman did that for Wheeler. And why would Feynman do it for Wheeler? Wheeler was Feynman's graduate advisor.
Yeah.
He wrote his PhD thesis for Wheeler.
Do you think both were associated with aerospace?
For, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, but all these aerospace people, or people who were working on gravitation, etc., would go to these conferences and interact, including Townsend Brown and Lou Whitney and Whitten and those others, and they got someplace, it looks like, and didn't. They went dark.
Yeah.
Lewis Whitney didn't do anything else in gravitation, and T. Townsend Brown went to work for the military-industrial complex and never published another thing about his work. And somebody started dreaming up string theory, and the government threw money at it. So money is what causes research to happen. Why? Because it's publish or perish. And you got to have money to do the research.
How did the government throw money at
National
string theory?
Science Foundation funding, Department of Defense direct funding,
Do you think
DARPA funding, etc.
Do you think string theory itself is sort of a limited hangout for more real physics?
No, I think string theory is, they know it's wrong, and it's aiming them away by, quote, bribing all the people into doing what they have to do anyway, which is do interesting work to get promotions,
but why
have a lab.
If you want a vital core national security, program, like why would you deflect? Why would you get all these
secret topologists in a room at a blackboard in the basement of Lockheed somewhere, or are they knowing?
Yeah,
right.
I think we had enough stuff we've gotten from other things that we used it to recreate what could be done, and we didn't care about all these stories about people working on anti-gravity stuff and getting stomped on and or their life ended. I just think there are too many of these things telling us they don't want people to go down the route they were going in the 1950s.
Well, it's really fascinating history because the establishment of quantum gravity, which led to string theory, was in 1957 at the UNC North Carolina Chapel Hill Conference, headed up by Agnew Bonson. You had Lewis Whitten there from Martin Corporation, pre-Lockheed merger, from their anti-gravity division, RIAS. The whole thing is sponsored by Wright Airfield.
Right.
And then Agnew Bonson, simultaneous to doing this kind of top theoretical physics conference, is funding Townsend Brown. And so there's this question of, like, is Townsend Brown doing the vital stuff kind of in the back room where they're doing the more kind of theoretical work and maybe, getting some things wrong or groping in the dark? And the one thing that Eric Weinstein has pointed out about this conference, which I find fascinating, is there's an Austrian mathematician named Hermann Bondi.
Yes, Bondi, yes.
Bondi asks this really interesting question about, he goes, but what if you remove the positivity conditions in Einstein's field equations? And don't you get all sorts of weird anomalous effects in physics that involve negative mass or negative energy?
Which is all you need to manipulate the stress energy tensor so you can warp space-time.
There you go. He kind of gets laughed out of the room or marginalized, or maybe he asked the wrong question that was a little too provocative for some of the, sponsors of the conference. And then you end up with, Alcubierre, this, Mexican physicist, from University of Mexico, PhD, who solves Einstein's equations for faster than light travel. And then you get Sonny White, who is a, propulsions engineer at NASA,
yeah,
who is working with negative energy, negative mass when it comes to faster than light travel. And so you really have to ask the question, did it all start with these positivity conditions, this sort of governor that was placed on Einstein, where if you take the governor off, you get all sorts of really anomalous, interesting effects. And maybe Townsend Brown was doing this in the back room.
Here's what lots and lots of things in science are discovered serendipitously.
Mm.
And I think Townsend Brown and others accidentally excited the vacuum field and got weird stuff out of it and saw gravitational anomalies.
Mm. Mm.
And once you see that, you can't go back. Once I saw a UFO, I couldn't go back.
Yep.
Okay, so it's just, I believe these people saw it, and they were determined to spend their life figuring it out.
Well, we talked about multiple tech trees in the physical phenomena, the non-physical phenomenon. What for you is like the most convincing evidence that there are multiple ways of doing this?
Okay, so Alcubierre is one way, but that's not the only way. The other way is because of the amount of negative energy required. I believe that Sarfati is saying, no. You can do faster than light travel with a battery. And his work is totally different. It's low energy, has another scalar field involved in his equations as his modification to Einstein's field equations. I don't yet know of an experiment that says Sarfati is correct, except he's been on this problem for 50 years. When he first claimed he had a UFO or alien, non-human intelligence experience, he's been on it forever. And he was one of the great young physicists out in California that wound up being amongst the hippies that saved physics. Mm-hmm. He is one of those guys. And his career has been very non-traditional, but he was a student up at Cornell with some of the best. He had a terrific education, and he is capable, and he's irascible, and hard to get him to explain stuff for normal human beings to understand.
I posted an 8-hour interview with him, and it was not enough time to get to the heart of the issue.
Right.
Yeah.
But
he doesn't like me very much. I don't know why, but
you're not a PhD scientist.
That's what he said. He said you're not a physicist.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not saying I'm a physicist.
He's a snob.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be.
Jack is hard-nosed, scientific snob, but he also feels he's been treated badly by those who are in the mainstream of physics.
He has some uniquely incisive ideas.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's kind of, he's over here on the very low energy Planck side of things with Pice over here on the very high energy Schwinger side of things.
Yes. Yeah. Schwinger's, a lot of people don't realize that everybody knows that Feynman was involved in quantum electrodynamics, but Schwinger also won the Nobel Prize at the same time as Feynman and Tominaga. And Schwinger's version of quantum electrodynamics is being used by Pais in the implementation of his stress energy tensor manipulation to get the stuff we need to engineer through the next patent into warping of space-time. Schwinger is brilliant. He was as hard to understand as Sarfati is. Very hard to understand. And the thing that changed everything for Tominaga, Feynman, and Schwinger, and all the rest of physics, is Freeman Dyson existed. He got in a car with Feynman, and they drove across the country.
And so Feynman happened to be driving from Cleveland to Albuquerque, and he offered to take me for a ride just to see the country. And he talked about physics, of course, a great deal. And there I argued with him a lot because I still had strong resistance to his way of doing things.
And Feynman had an inspiration and wrote down on 2 pages showing the equivalence of all 3 of their models. And so quantum electrodynamics was born because Feynman rode across the country with Freeman Dyson in his car.
How do you think, when you look at quantum electrodynamics, you have energy in the quantum vacuum, which is this fascinating concept. You have, particles and antiparticles. And it's just this like very kind of trippy, kind of ontologically, like, when you learn a little bit more about it. Do you think it comports at all with the UFO phenomena, quantum electrodynamics?
Yes, because it's the application of quantum electrodynamics to the vacuum that is producing what's needed to make warp drive work. One of many different paths, but it's got to be something like that. Otherwise, it's magic that we don't even have the language to describe.
Do you think Einstein-Cartan is relevant in this big picture?
Yes, because I think...
Wait, real quick, what is Einstein-Cartan?
So about 15 years after general relativity, a French mathematician, Cartan, comes around, and Einstein had equated the torsional tensor. He said it's symmetric in free space. We're going to zero it out. And Cartan was like, wait a second, it's not zero in matter. You could have spin density fields that are substantial enough to add meaningful contributions. And so this was pursued by a number of different, there's Einstein-Cartan-Collar, Einstein-Cartan-Evans. It was like Dr. Ning Lee's associates, Dr. Vargas, Dr. Tor were into this. And it allows you to get electromagnetic contributions to the spin density tensor, which then builds essentially like, curvature-based gravitation, warp space-time.
But here's the bottom line. What this does, Cartan's modifications, is given fertilizer to the following field. I could put interesting materials in and around quantum electrodynamics, things going on, and I get gravitational effects out through this torsional tensor, which inside those materials does not zero out the way Einstein assumed it would, because he was thinking of the vacuum.
So topological insulators, which you're very deep on, these
Totally.
These materials.
There's a metamaterial involved. Topological insulators is the kind of thing where you've got to do some weird constitution of it, so you get weird squeezings, so you trap the right vacuum particles at the right frequencies, and then you manipulate them out. But the material is what's doing the squeezing that allows the quantum vacuum to give you something you can use. So you got to have the material, otherwise you don't have the torsion tensor being non-zero.
So what's an example of a topological insulator then? One of these materials that seems to, when you do weird quantum electrodynamics, high energy physics around them, they seem to exhibit anomalous effects.
Let me tell you how you know a true scientist. They say, I don't know because I'm not a material scientist, but I'm going to ask this guy over here because he is.
Bismuth, antimony, telluride.
So this is what's so crazy is when you say bismuth, I think of the magnesium bismuth parts that Gary Nolan has in his lab. And I think of the magnesium bismuth that Lewis Witten in front of a class. Lewis Witten is working at Martin Corporation's anti-gravity division. He says that he was contracted by Wright Airfield to work on gravity. And he said that there was a guy named Townsend who had a weird isotope of bismuth that exhibited anti-gravity properties. And bismuth shows up in Townsend Brown's papers as, didn't use the word topological insulator, but as a high K dielectric in his capacitor experiments. And so he's using high energy and applying it to this insulator. And so that's fascinating.
Bismuth is an inherently topological dopant to different semiconductor materials. So when you have a lattice, which can be a metallic conductor or an insulator or a semiconductor, it has this band gap between the valence electrons and the conduction electrons. In a conductor, they overlap. There's no gap. In an insulator, they're quite far apart. They don't jump on their own with thermal energy. In a semiconductor, they're very close. Topological insulator is kind of a warping of the semiconductor definition in that band gap can move and change. If you apply a B field, if you warm it up, if you do cool it down, if you do different things to it, it could be individual quantum states, the band gap.
But the issue is you can apply an external field and it stops being an insulator and turns into something special.
And what's
unobtainium?
Turns into unobtainium by any other means.
And what does that something special involve as far as its properties? What can that something special do?
For example, the right metamaterial with an external magnetic field on it might emit positive and negative matter that you can drive the warp field with.
Wow. And so with negative mass, you could theoretically affect kind of the quantum vacuum.
Yes.
And you could create a gradient that you could sort of surf. You could surf space-time itself. Is that kind of right?
That's one of the notions. That's the Alcubierre notion. You can have a gradient that you can surf on across space.
Heiss describes it as being sucked into space-time or into the vacuum, like you're slitting open an envelope and it pulls you in. It's kind of interesting.
So fascinating.
But we're at the beginning of the science because it's been covered up and unfunded for so long.
It's amazing. I think there's a convergence of that science and consciousness stuff. The consciousness stuff is full of snake oil and woo-woo BS.
Except where Donald Hoffman is.
Well, except for Donald Hoffman, and I think a lineage of what's called parapsychology at elite universities in mid-century, where they're studying basically random, or conventionally thought of as random quantum mechanical effects like radioactive isotope decay and seeing that there is an ability for the mind to affect in a statistically significant way, the output of ones or zeros on kind of a graphical
if
interface.
people that knee-jerk reaction, that can't happen, need to go read the peer-reviewed 100 or so papers written by Dean Radin demonstrating conclusively these effects are real.
I couldn't agree more. One of my close mentors, who couldn't be more credible as far as like what he does in the real world, and I think we're going to come out with an interview soon, was very involved in the Princeton parapsychology lab and their random event generator experiments.
Yes.
And I've hit him with every single skeptical, file drawer issue, survivorship bias, p-hack, whatever. And like he has great answers for all of it. And at a certain point, you have to be like, well, that can't exist because I don't want it to exist. And actually, maybe there's something there.
That was me. I had to be converted to be convinced that there's something here, but there's definitely something there.
And I think the thing that is there, the physical possible model of consciousness, would be if the Penrose thing is right. So if there's something in the brain that can maintain quantum coherence, and then it kind of, decoheres, and then you see reality in this kind of macroscopic, relativistic way, then you're sort of rendering reality in real time.
And as you live it, you render it.
Exactly. It comports fully with the Wheeler observer theory of the universe model. So if you are responsible for the rendering, but that decoherence is going on in your mind, then your ability to affect matter isn't like you're like shooting particles out at the material world. It's you're affecting the rendering of the material world, if that makes sense. Like you are the interface. It's going on inside the mind.
So distance is not a factor.
So distance is not a factor, which is all the quantum stuff. Distance and time are not a factor. You have temporal and spatial non-locality.
You almost kind of need something like this to get from here. You need an effect that appears to take place in a realm where distance is not a limiting factor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which in all the random event generator experiments, time and distance don't matter. Right. And it's really made. So how do you guys think, if you have on the one side, you have kind of consciousness stuff, and then on the other side, you have, exotic propulsion, high energy physics. Do you guys think they converge anywhere?
So I've been into the work of Hoffman now for 3 years.
Yeah.
And he's come up with this model of consciousness in challenged from the famous physicist at Princeton, who told him, I need you to show me that your model of consciousness might be able to be based upon or utilize what's called decorated permutations, because they are involved in a physical object called amplitude-hedrons, which are relevant to modern, current, ongoing quantum physics. Okay. So this is a really interesting model, and Hoffman is brilliant at describing how you get from this gigantic collection of conscious agents that are implemented in these permutations that are decorated with other information, project down to each of us individually to give us our space-time rendering. That's our desktop that we view the universe through. But we all are derived from this up here. So his theory from the outset requires a universal consciousness pool. All right, so that's interesting. So then over here, you've got Wolfram and his team with a brilliant physicist writing papers in it, who have taken hypergraphs, which are basically structures for programs and so forth, computational structures, and they have now worked out in peer-reviewed papers how you can take one of these hypergraphs and keep twiddling it and working on until you get down to, what I've got here is I've built from code the general theory of relativity. And you do it over here slightly differently, and you get down to I've run this code and done all this work, and what came out of it is quantum field theory. So I asked the following question. Is it ever going to be possible to connect the information field that's being manipulated by consciousness to all the stuff over here? So I asked the following technical question. It's very technical answer. Is there a mathematical connection between decorated permutations and hypergraphs? And I found a mapping through certain permutations that directly map from the decorated permutations onto the components in the hypergraph. And that's my only result so far, but it's the beginning of how you marry consciousness, if he has the right model, to physics, if they have the right model. So for me, it might be string theory. It might be something a goofy, crazy mathematician would do, but it's really enticing. And I have this mechanism written down, and I'm writing it up because I just learned it last week.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And he described it to me on the train over, and I was kind of mind blown, actually. We got to get you and him and Pines in the same room to go over the hypergraph connection, because
yeah, I'll let you guys go.
It was soup to me.
Yeah.
Oh, Pines, Pines, if you're seeing me, you're amazing. Let's talk.
Oh, let's do it. Let's do it. We'll do a part 3 with all of us.
Yes.
That sounds like a blast.
Yeah.
Well,
it'll be but what people are seeing is this kind of conversation and that kind of interaction.
Yeah.
Is how scientists work together. They have ideas, they bounce them off each other, they write them down, they make mistakes, they correct each other, they're hard on each other, they're supportive of each other, and in the end, we get somewhere. I don't know that this is going to go anywhere, but when you're a scientist, in my case, a mathematician, and you're working on something and you have this notion, and you sit down, and all of a sudden, this chill washes over you. You feel the surge of adrenaline, and you see your way through, and you write it down, and you go, I have figured out the connection between this and this, and here's how we do it. It's just this most unreal thing that happens to people in the moment of discovery.
That's amazing. So what do you think is happening overall? Because it feels like, we were talking earlier when I first saw you, were like, things are happening. I was like, no, things feel like they're speeding up. They really do. We just had hearings on the Hill, both in the Congress and then this week in the Senate. This revelation of this program called Immaculate Constellation. We have a new director of the All-Domain Anomalous Resolution Office. But even more broadly, it just feels like in the zeitgeist, aliens...
Well, that's to me the important part,
yeah,
Jesse, is
the zeitgeist.
The zeitgeist has changed sufficiently that it's okay to discuss this and bandy about ideas about it without being afraid you're going to be called a moron or crazy.
Well, the felt sense of it is like, this is, and I feel it with the show too, where I'm like, I'm going hard, like traveling everywhere, and like it feels like things are about to blow up in this area. Like the next year is going to be extremely revelatory, and that's really like based on instinct. Like, maybe I know it more than the average person as far as possible things coming down the pike, but it's really like this kind of intimation that big things are happening and real revelations are going to happen, when it comes to ontological truth. Maybe, again, that's supported somewhat by the new administration. Say what you will about it, but it feels like there's some...
If the new administration will come in and release research funds to support the university faculty and the students, we will build a cadre of people that can move us down this line faster.
How can they not? It's like, how, if you're aware of the reality of this stuff, and you're aware of the reality of science that's been totally suppressed, that is important for the U.S. to maintain its, international primacy, how could you, in your right mind, not, just keep going with this kind of Cold War secrecy where like nothing gets revealed?
The most damaging thing to technological and intellectual progress inside the United States, nearly hampered it into non-existence, is while we were doing all this wild development of quantum mechanics and general relativity, nuclear energy, and so forth and so on, we were wide open. We interacted with people all over the world. Scientists got on boats and traveled to Europe. People came from Asia to interact at conferences, and they shared stuff. We've stopped allowing that, and people are trapped with the inability to travel or interact because they don't have the funds to do that operation. So support for this is the only way we will make major breakthroughs, because we don't know who, people are going to look at this and they go, who is this guy with a purple shirt on with a Southern accent? Why does he know this? Because I was allowed to take time to think about it and listen to others who talked about it. And so I had an idea. It may be useless, but I feel it's not. But if that's happening across all sorts of places, who knows who will walk into the room as a young person about to learn something and make a major contribution to this and just change our entire universe.
Well, it's a beautiful thing too, because I think the elite citadel of, physicists or, even philosophers, like academia itself, is going to be, proven to be kind of stale in this new model where like this stuff exists. And so you're going to get these kind of amateur experimentalists, people who just listen.
We don't have a choice.
Earnestly, and we have to let them in and we have to allow them to contribute, because it's a really interesting field where if you're just early on it, have good instincts and earnestly, work at it.
I very much admire Eric Weinstein's public stance on the disastrous things we have done to intellectual development, science, education, etc., in the current environment. I hope people listen to him.
I hope people listen to him too. And I hope maybe we can create some sort of institute outside of academia that allows for safe exfiltration of science that has been suppressed historically and stuck and lodged in these compartments in government and aerospace. And I think it's really important. If there's a way to do that, you don't want to tip your hat to the adversary. You don't want to allow infinitely destructive tech out. But the idea that science itself should be, snapshot whatever we had in 1957 is the end of history when it comes to science. That's crazy. And it's not even good from a national security standpoint.
It's not good from basically any standpoint. Look, new physics, new math, new biology, new chemistry. From that, we're going to get new materials, new medicines, new ideas, new ways of doing things, and renew ourselves. What we need, major ideas to figure out how to undo the damage we're doing to our environment. Overuse, overconsumption.
Agree.
The recovery of materials in an energy efficient manner. But you need serious research. You need it to be sexy to get into the technical fields again. But I got to tell you, the Hume Center was funded by science and technology guy from CIA named Ted Hume and his wife. Ted left CIA, started a company, did well, sold it to Kinetic, and plowed some of the money back into the center. And the goal for the center was talk young people into doing technical science and engineering, etc., and be willing to think about doing it for the government in the intelligence community, Department of Defense, etc. And he put his money where his mouth was. And so what we did was we got kids to work on problems of the government wanted solved by carving off pieces that would be attractive to them that were totally unclassified, could be used for PhD thesis, master thesis, senior projects, etc., while at the same time introducing them to the other side of the equation. And some of them would go all the way, and they would get a security clearance, they would get a summer job, and they wound up leaving school not with full 20 years of debt, but with money in their pocket. And they went in and to a large extent stayed in because they did not need to worry about where the next bill was going to get paid from. And so it's a concept which can be done over and over again if we just decide to do it.
And it's a timeless concept, whether it was the Institute of Advanced Studies, which was formed by Abraham Flexner, who wrote a great paper which kind of was the auspice under which it operated, which it was the usefulness of useless things. Let's fund evergreen, kind of put tons of money into long time horizon. There's a great book actually called Leisure as the Basis of Culture, and I think it talks about the root of the word school is the Greek skole, which actually it's a double meaning, and it means leisure, and it's actually come to be associated with the Latin scala, which means ladder. And so actually, like, academia should be this leisurely contemplation of the world where you shouldn't be worried about where your next paycheck is coming from. And it's just turned into this kind of, hyper rat race where we're scurrying over one another, publish or perish, whatever. And so, something like this, or a Bell Labs, which is, hybrid, private, but also public funding, where you're putting tons of money into new science and innovation, seems like it would be necessary.
And the return on investment, how can it not be good? Because when we've unleashed the human intellectual capacity to operate freely, we have never lost.
Well, out of Bell Labs, you got the semiconductor, and that is responsible for like a third of our modern economy. And you could say, oh, that could have happened in a private venture capital context. Like, no, it couldn't. Like, you needed way too much money to make that thing work. And so the government funding thing is incredibly important, and I hope that does get revitalized.
Elon Musk is completely and utterly destroying the old way of going to space and giving us a new way of going to space. And he did it because he first bootstrapped his way to money, then he turned his ideas and put his entire fortune at risk bringing us SpaceX. But so that isn't the only model that'll work, but the gist of it, freeing people to do what they can do so that their minds are engaged and they're not worried all the time, we will see magic come out of it.
I agree. And I think hopefully, Elon, I think he's been walking back his dogmatism around, basically like chemical combustion being the only way when it comes to space travel. And so I hope he becomes open to this because he's obviously, America's chief industrialist. He's incredibly important for anything we do on the science and tech front. And when he focuses on a thing, it seems to just happen. And so I hope he shifts his focus towards more exotic science like this, because it would seem to be, right up his alley, given, his overall modus operandi in life.
Well, and the old inagile structures are not working for this problem set. So he is pretty much the perfect example of wiping away the old structures with new agile structures.
Couldn't agree more.
All because he got angry when the Russians wouldn't sell him a rocket.
Exactly.
He wanted to put a garden on Mars.
And then it's interesting, he and Mike Griffin, because they had really made more progress in liquid fuel rocket engines. And so he and Mike Griffin go to Russia and they actually find the rocket engines. Mike Griffin forms, later he formed Space Force, but he became the NASA admin. And then he formed SpaceX, Elon Musk. And so it's this interesting sort of tech transfer or something that happened from that.
Yeah, they owned the engines for decades with the RD-180 and those things. They're fantastic engines. Musk has left them in the dust.
Why do you think Elon Musk, it's been revealed that he's met with Putin a bunch of times. I found that very interesting because I think, it's like he's providing Starlink terminals to Ukraine and he's sort of like, openly helping Ukraine right when the war starts, and then he meets with Putin. That is this interesting thing where maybe the actions don't reflect, what you're...
So Elon is beyond important to the national security state and its needs for overhead stuff by transporting their stuff to space. He's very important. He has a bunch of national security contracts. So what this means is, and he can't be above the law, so the following is a fact. If he's interacting with the head of state of an adversary, he is required to do reporting to his security officer. If he has not done security reporting of all of this to his security officer, he is in violation of the terms of his security clearance. I'm not saying any of this is true. I'm saying if it is true, it's a real problem.
Well, I'm sure he was communicative with his security officer, and then that begs the question, you know, maybe politics isn't what it seems or something. You know, that's like, it's just an interesting kind of question. But okay, so we've gone into, you know,
but I don't know what I don't know what impact, and haven't been told by any what impact Musk having an interaction with Putin has had on anything.
I don't either. We got into some of the physics around UFOs and aliens. Why do you think they're here, and what do you think they're doing?
So I know a lot of experiencers, and I've talked to a lot of experiencers. And for whatever reason, even though I have an intelligence community background and I'm this, you know, egghead scientist, they still seem to talk to me. And they have for a while. So the following seems to be their story. Not my story, but their story. They're doing breeding experiments for reasons we don't know. Maybe the government in secrecy knows, but the people who are being used for these experiments don't know why it's being done. But it's interesting. Some are coming because they're constantly telling the innocent and the young and the powerless to go out and tell everybody we're not treating our planet well. So some are coming because this place is magical. The ecology and the totally perfect conditions for life, they can't be like this everywhere. I believe life is in a lot of places. I don't believe there are many places that are so suited to life as this planet is. And we need to take care of it. And I think a bunch of them that care about all of this are here sampling our life forms, interacting, trying to figure out how it all worked, how it was all put together. And they have the time and capacity and resources to study the problem for a long time. Because I think they've been here for a long time.
Have you met an experiencer that has gotten an implant?
Oh, Lord, yes.
And so you've seen the implant?
My girlfriend has 2 implants.
Really?
One of them is in her leg right next to her femur, and one of them is in her forehead. So she occasionally gets these headaches. She said, I think this thing is going on.
And it's inside her forehead.
So I guessed. I made a guess. I said, all right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get an electromagnetic field sensor, and I'm going to put it next to her head and see what happens. And I have a video online of me moving this field meter across her head and watching that implant pulse RF transmissions. Human bodies don't pulse RF transmission.
That's terrifying.
And it was coming right out of her forehead.
Oh my God.
I have a video which I will show you and share with you.
Left. Right. Oh. Right there. We found it.
That is crazy. Wow. And so what does she think the implant might be being used for?
I think it's a geolocation and other information transfer mechanism. Why else would they do a digital burst coming out of her forehead? So they're saying, so look, I didn't believe these. Can I tell you straight up? I didn't believe these stories at all about these implants and them being used tracking until I wrote the patent and formed the company that tells you how they do it.
What do you mean?
Hawkeye 360 is how the aliens would find these beacons all over the planet.
Wait, what?
The technology behind Hawkeye 360 is how the aliens could track us across the planet.
Wait, explain. So you're saying the sensor tech. So you have a company, Hawkeye 360, that does it does sensory analysis, and satellites in space.
Yes, but it finds RF emitters on the ground. So if they have a 1.6 gigahertz emitter in your skull, the satellites flying over your head can locate that thing to a square meter.
Unbelievable. So with Hawkeye 360, you could geolocate your girlfriend forever.
Yeah.
And so you're saying that presumably aliens have this tech.
Well, they're 1,000 years or more ahead of us, so they have the tech.
Were you able to glean much from what the meter was saying about the...
It was a pulse. Yeah, it was strobing, so it was pulsing. So to me, as a communications engineer, that's what I did for Federated Wireless, is it's a digital communication system. I have not taken the time, I would already say, people are going to go, why haven't you? Because I've been busy. We were taking the time to figure out what the transmission is, how it's digitally modulated, what is the encoding of the data, so I can try to figure out what it is they're transmitting. But if they've done it right, they've got it encrypted, and I'll never break the encryption.
That's crazy. What's the most insane, mind-blowing, ontologically shocking thing you've experienced in all of your inquiries into UFOs and aliens?
Okay, so I've put up a bunch of sensors around my house, especially after I visited, the most ontologically upsetting, transformative event in my life was becoming curious about Chris Bledsoe and going to visit him. Spend days with him. And we had many experiences.
Tell me about that, because I just met Chris Bledsoe in D.C., and I definitely felt like there's an interesting energy there for sure. And for the audience, Chris Bledsoe wrote a book called UFO of God, and he was this very interesting guy who he claimed to see the lady, quote unquote, this like divine figure who he speaks to once a year. He gets prophecies from this woman. All of this you could easily write off as total quackery if the lady wasn't in all sorts of, wasn't all throughout NASA and other sort of, interesting agencies when it comes to, her being depicted. And then very high up person at the CIA, Jim Semivan, visiting Chris Bledsoe right after he gets his sort of prophecies and taking a deep interest in him, along with Tim Taylor, who is a NASA mission controller. It seems like there's a way in which the information that Chris Bledsoe is getting is comporting with sensitive information that the government actually has. And so that's why people are so interested in what he's sort of saying. So yeah, I began to see all sorts of stuff that I told you about earlier, photos and other things that said UAP are here. Yeah.
So I grew curious.
Yeah.
And
these are photos that you saw just through friends in the kind of classified
they would say, have you seen this, Bob? I went, no, I haven't seen it. Wow. Well, I don't know about that, so thank you for showing it to me. But anyway, so because they did not have the right to transfer it to me. But I just, quote, happened to see it as I was passing by, and they might have said, look. Anyway, so I became curious because it heated up. Something was obviously happening inside the government. And because I knew there were meetings going on, but I was not privy to them. But I saw some drippings. So I became curious. So the person that I decided could teach me about all these UFO nuts was Richard Dolan, who wrote 2 volumes on UFOs and the national security state. I am a denizen of the national security state. So I figured, okay, I'll go to this guy and figure stuff out. So I built a working relationship with Richard, read his books, and then he interviewed Chris Bledsoe in 4 one-hour segments. And by the end of it, I was done. I had to go visit. I'm in Blacksburg, Virginia. Chris is over in North Carolina. He's 2 hours from me. So I wrote him and said, Chris, I'm a scientist. I also work for the government, doing work and so forth, and I'm very interested in the things that are happening to you. I might even be able to help you with some sensors that help you provide more evidence it's actually occurring. So he was silent for 3 weeks. And then he said, hey, Bob, thank you for your offer. I've decided you can come over. So I went over and I stayed 4 days. 3 days, it rained. The 4th day, we had a clear night. So for 3 days, he told me every secret thing that's happened to him. It's unreal. All that stuff in the book and more, he told me while I was in his home, visiting with his family. And so on the last night, it was clear. He says, oh, it's going to be clear tonight. We can do sky observing. And I saw this look come over his face. It was like he was in trance and communicating with whatever his entranced state was. And he says, okay, we should go outside. So we went outside, we stood for a minute, and there were these little things that were going off like flash bulbs in the skies and in the trees. And I goes, what in the heck is that? Well, my brain was going, that's an electromagnetic pulse. I bet I could detect that. My mind was going. But I was totally engaged and focused. And then, all of a sudden, right above the trees, about 300 or 400 meters away, this thing flashed into existence. It was a massive orb, very bright, and it waxed and waned in brightness, colors and royal, floated across the sky, was not moving linearly. It was doing curved and zigs and zags and went over the sky, and it slowly faded out as it went over. I went, whoa. So he said called in and told his son Ryan to come out, Ryan Bledsoe. So Ryan came out, and as soon as Ryan got out there, boom, another one right over our heads, 40 feet in diameter, very bright, floated across the sky, and all of us enjoyed it until it was gone. So Ryan was so excited, he got video of this thing flying over our head and ran in to show it to the people with me and with the Bledsoe family that he had seen one of these things with me. And it was clearly good that I saw it because I was a scientist and I could say it was real. That's really why they wanted me there, is I could say, as a scientist, I saw this and it's real. If I'm here to tell you, I saw it and it was real. So we sat there and I began to notice this purple aura that looked like purple glowy smoke right above the treetops. And it just slowly but surely brightened. And it finally got to this place where it was visible. And I says, you know, Chris, I'm seeing something. He says, yeah, I can kind of feel it. And all of a sudden, it disappeared. Just all of a sudden, like somebody turned the light switch off. And without missing a beat, Chris said, okay, they're gone now, and we can go inside. I went, whoa, that's telepathy or something. It says, that's just wild. So we went inside. We finished our visit, pleasantries, hugs, all of that stuff, and I went home. And they followed me home.
Whoa.
Like almost everyone who has a serious experience with him, they follow you home.
Whoa.
I saw them regularly. Things would show up in my yard. I have this video of a triangle of orbs going up and down, making sure my security camera got it. And I wondered if they were bugs, which is naturally what you'd think is an IR is illuminating bugs. So I decided to turn the security camera on, long record, go out through the carport and come around and see. And I went out through the carport, came around the corner, and I could see them with my naked eye. It had nothing to do with the IR. And they were just sitting there doing this on a triangle. And as I turned around the corner, they took off and went straight up.
Wow.
Okay, so you will find that I am the next to last incident in his book, UFO of God.
Wow.
Okay, and he told me while I was there that Jim Semivan said, oh, yeah, you should let Bob in. This should be interesting. So Jim Semivan opened the door for me.
Interesting. That's so wild. So what do you think, why do you think somebody who's so high up at the CIA like Jim Semivan, seems like a really smart, awesome guy, why would he be interested in Chris Bledsoe? Because yeah, what do you think?
Jim has now talked publicly, so I don't mind saying he had experiences of entities in his room with his wife, and they were not pleasant experiences.
Yeah.
So that traumatized him and his wife, and so he became interested in finding out answers. And then he heard about Chris Bledsoe and knew enough traditional texts in Latin, Roman, Greek, whatever, to show this lady stuff is real. It's in the church and so forth.
Do you have a sense of what the lady stuff is? Because I believe part of the Chris Bledsoe prophecy is that Easter because he sees her every Easter. He goes out to this one little place next to his property and talks to her. And I think it's something like Easter of 2026. We're going to have some important event happen. Do you know about this?
So, and I have a real story to tell about that too.
Okay.
He sees missiles being fired at the country of Iran while he is observing the event, including some astronomical events that are in the sky over the top of the pyramids at Giza. From the astronomical event, astronomers have calculated that date. Okay, so he doesn't know whether it was a vision or he was transported in time, but the entities intervene to stop the bombs from landing.
Wow.
That's what he sees. Now, how do I know that anyone takes any of this seriously? Here's how I know. Grant Cameron visited, who's a well-known UFO person.
Yep.
Written many books on the experience of the phenomenon and so forth.
Yeah.
He went and visited Chris. And Chris shared a picture with him that Grant put up on his Facebook page. So I saw the picture. And everyone who had seen that picture missed the import of it. And what is the import of that picture? It's a napkin and an envelope with the napkin partially obscuring the address that's on the envelope. I knew the address because it was the address of Chris Bledsoe. I knew the napkin because it was the presidential seal on a napkin from Camp David. There's only one way you can have that napkin because it's a crime to copy the presidential seal. There's only one person that can get you to Camp David. And the picture was mailed to him by Tim Taylor.
By Tim Taylor.
And the only person that story can have been told to in that envelope was Barack Obama.
Oh my God.
The letter to me is ironclad proof that Chris's story was taken all the way to Barack Obama.
Via Tim Taylor.
Yes.
What?
Yeah.
So this is crazy. And you're sure that seal and that...
You can't copy it. The Secret Service and others will come and get you.
Oh my God.
And that Grant and others have not been slapped around for doing it. So the napkin was legit.
And whoa. So this brings up all sorts of questions.
Well, now you know why I'm a good intelligence agent. Just from looking at the picture, I put that entire narrative.
That's
in it.
really
That's
impressive.
The kind of stuff I used to do.
Well, Tim Taylor to me is people is like, who's the number one person you want to interview? Like Elon Musk. I'm like, I love Elon, but
he'll never give an interview.
Tim Taylor.
He'll never do.
I met him once briefly, but he's kind of gone dark on me, and I would do anything. He's my number one person who I want to speak with because he's so intriguing.
I got him to talk to me for about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Because it says, Tim, I'm good friends with Chris Bledsoe. I went over to his house, this and the other, and we interacted for 10 minutes, and he quickly moved on. And from that on, I was like I didn't exist.
So what's his deal? What is he trying to do? Because just for context for the audience, this is a guy who shows up in Diana Pasulka's life when she's connecting the dots between Catholic concepts of divine interactions with modern ufology, and she shows Diana all sorts of interesting things. They go to the Vatican together. At the Vatican Observatory, they know who Tim Taylor is.
And they let him into the Vatican archives without her presence.
Without
an escort.
Without an escort. He's a guy who's, I guess she claims that he flashed all sorts of interesting, 3-letter credentials, like all of them, as if he was sort of... And then Ryan Bledsoe, Chris Bledsoe's son, says that Tim Taylor was told them that he was part of a secret time travel group in Nassau in the Bahamas, and Townsend Brown was the president of that time travel group. I would think all of this were to be totally insane. I'd write it off completely out of hand. But I know that Townsend Brown spent a lot of time in the Bahamas, and he experimented with gravity, but he was secretly extremely interested in time travel because time and gravity are really coupled in general relativity. So who is Tim Taylor, and why does he keep popping up in all these places?
Your time axis is not my time axis, because whatever gravitational differences there are between us, you're warped space-time so that your time is not my time.
Okay, but what does that have to do with Tim Taylor?
It's just so interesting that all this gravitation stuff shows, and Gates is a famous physicist who has shown how general relativity allows for the transmission of information back in time.
GR does?
Yeah.
How does it? Because isn't there the Hawking chronological conjecture or whatever? How can you send info back?
I think that there's a certain censorship. You can't do certain things if they violate certain conditions. But sending something back that's just information doesn't necessarily violate any of those restrictions. And so Gates has written down how you get time travel backwards out of a general relativity. I don't think others have. I think people have already worked out through numerical simulation how you could use black hole gravitational curvature to travel through time.
There's the traversable wormholes. There's the idea that you can reverse qubit positions in quantum computations. So it actually makes probably even more sense that you could send info back in time using quantum mechanics. But all of this is interesting. But like, what about Tim Taylor? Tim Taylor is a NASA mission controller who has access to the President of the United States.
And done miraculous work in orthopedic instruments.
Vivek's biotechnology. It's the
and
$100 million
made it $100 million on it.
So who is he?
I don't know the answer.
Because how are you a NASA mission controller, a biotech entrepreneur? You're telling Diana Pasulka you're part of a secret space program, and you're getting sort of orders on high from places that like even your immediate superiors don't understand that you're part of a secret space program.
Don't have 3 letters.
Yeah.
He works for the Hammer. That's the story. And no one that I know knows who the Hammer is.
So the Hammer is this like ineffable entity that
I don't know. I don't even know if it's human. I don't know if it's NHI. I don't know what it is, except he told Bledsoe he works for the Hammer.
And does Bledsoe like Tim Taylor, or what's?
Yeah, I think that the relationship has grown more distant. They're not really good friends that much anymore, but they were friendly. And the story that I like most is Tim Taylor brought a piece of the Roswell crash, put it in Chris's hand and others in the family, and Chris showed an enormous, unexpected reaction. And Taylor's response to Chris being impacted so heavily by this UFO material was, "Why you? I don't understand. Why you?" And they tell that story all the time.
Why you, like in a suspicious way?
Why you in a curious way. Not negative, just curious.
And his son as well, right? Is the connection there.
There are multiple members of that family that have really unique abilities.
I got to get out there. Yeah, we had a good interaction.
We should go down. I'm supposed to go down and show him some new cameras.
When are you going?
I'll let you know. So we'll just go together and maybe you can video it.
Field trip.
I
love it. Is there anything else we should cover that you think is worth bringing up, or?
I'm 70 years old and I have life full of experiences that are weird. So I can't think of anything except I'm going to keep working on this UAP based science.
Yeah.
I am having to learn and relearn stuff, but I'm making progress. But it's not like I don't have any abilities. I took quantum mechanics and differential geometry and relativity when I was in college and did well. And then when I went to Brown, I took quantum field theory from Leon Cooper, who gave us an explanation for superconductivity and won the Nobel for it. So it's not, I'm prepared. I need to jigger my abilities, relearn the current work.
Is there anything the audience can do to help you, or just follow you on Twitter? Or
follow me on Twitter.
What's your Twitter handle?
Bob McGuire, spelled McGwier _ N4HY. Well, that's my amateur radio call sign. So Bob McGuire _ N4HY is me on X.
Bob, it's been an honor and a pleasure. It's been a lot of fun, and excited to see what you do in all your new scientific endeavors. And hopefully we can go to the Bledsoes with you, and the journey continues.
Let's do it.